Welcome back to the College Football Every Game on the Board podcast, where we're back with Robbie Veno, and we're going rotation number 381 down to the end of the Saturday college football card. But Robbie, welcome into the podcast. How you feeling?
Feeling good today, Drew. How about yourself?
I'm feeling good, and you know what? The first game we got up here, 381-382, Kentucky, Texas A&M. It's a pretty sleeper game this weekend with the total sitting at 50.5 and Texas A&M laying less than a touchdown. It's pretty much 5.5 or 6 at home. This is kind of an exciting cross-division game here in the SEC, Robbie. How would you look to bet Kentucky, Texas A&M?
Yeah, and it certainly puts Kentucky through the ringer for 4 times in 5 weeks, right? 3 SEC games the last 4 weeks, Florida, Mississippi State, and South Carolina, all which they came up big to the surprise of a lot of people. The last couple of wins over Mississippi State and South Carolina, now on the road to College Station, where Texas A&M has been put through the ringer. Drew, they've had it extremely tough so far this year in the fact that they've played maybe 2 of the 3 best defensive lines in all of college football, Clemson and Alabama. I think the overwhelming key here, and we've said it before on the podcast, but we'll say it again because it's important and significant in this situation. Will Kentucky be able to run the football with Benny Snell? I know you hear him. He's one of the best interviews out there right now. It's a real exuberant kid. And, you know, he's fulfilled everything he said. He claims he can run on anybody. Always credits the team, the offensive line, and the whole group has played outstanding so far this year. And they have run whenever they had to run. But here's another test. When you take a real close examination of A&M, you find out that Alabama only ran for 130 yards on these guys, and Alabama can pretty much do whatever they want against anybody. At Clemson, or the home game against Clemson, Clemson only ran for 115 yards, Travis Etienne and company. So this is a tough team right now. A&M only giving up 3.1 yards per carry. On the road in College Station with a bullseye on your chest now. Nobody lets Kentucky walk in at this point thinking that it's a rollover game. Jimbo Fisher has his team a little bit ahead of schedule as far as I'm concerned. I kind of like the home team here. A little bit on edge still about the physicality of Kentucky on both sides of the football. They've been real good there, Drew, far better than I thought, and they match up real well. If I felt like A&M could, power drive them offensively with their big OL or with their defensive line, it would be a little easier play for A&M. But I would think that Kellen Mond and his dual threat ability, plus the fact that A&M's that good against the run, I'd lean that direction. 5.5's a lot to lay against a real good Kentucky team. But like I said, I think the fundamentals give me a little bit of a lean towards A&M.
Robbie, in the Big 12, we got 383, 384, Iowa State, Oklahoma State. Looks like this one 54.5 the total, with the Cowboys laying 9.5 at home in Stillwater.
Yeah, talk about a team that's been through it. Iowa State, really, and despite injuries, they've come through. Injury to the quarterback position, to the running back position. David Montgomery looks like he's probable this week, their star tailback. But, hey, they've had to play Iowa. They've had to play Oklahoma, and they've had to play TCU. Excellent defense, excellent offense, excellent both ways, and especially speed-wise with TCU. Nobody's beaten this Iowa State team up. Now comes Oklahoma State and their high-flying offense. I would say this, Drew, that the Oklahoma State team, with the defensive coordinator shift to Jim Knowles after the first 2 games, really, really looked like Oklahoma State was going to be a different team. And then they played Boise, and it still looked like they were going to be a different team because they really annihilated Boise State in that contest. But Texas Tech and then Kansas both put up points against this defense, and it has you wondering about the Jim Knowles scheme. The one thing that's crystal clear is that the aggressiveness of the defense can't be denied. They've recorded 22 sacks already this season, so expect Iowa State to be under pressure here to throw the football. They're kind of a balanced attack. They're not a chunk attack. So Oklahoma State maybe gets a small advantage there with their ability to rush the passer, but I just feel like the way Iowa State's been through so many tests so far and come through really good in those tests, that maybe it's the right side here just to take the points. I don't have a real preference towards this game, but 10.5 does seem like a lot. I looked at the total here this morning, 54.5. Couldn't really come to a firm conclusion. My first instinct was to play it over, thinking that both of these offenses might be able to get on track, but I'm not so sure Oklahoma State can do what they've been doing all season long. A lot of their season-long statistics are skewed by the Missouri State and the South Alabama games, in which they went crazy and picked up 1,349 yards in 2 games. Since then, they've been good, but they haven't been that good. So we'll see how this one goes. But like I say, I don't have a real preference side or total.
Robbie, let's head back to the SEC. We got 385, 386, Vandy at Georgia. This one, the Bulldogs laying, 26 at home in Athens, 54.5 the total. Would you look to get involved in this one?
Be tough, but I'd lean maybe toward the underdog with 26, Drew. It just seems like a huge number. And I know Georgia's the better team. They're the superior team. We won't even call them better. They're the superior team here. But Derek Mason and that defense does have a way of, taming other offenses to the point where they can't get totally untracked. Notre Dame scored 22. And again, that's Notre Dame with Brandon Wimbush, not Notre Dame with Ian Book, but they only scored 22. South Carolina did get loose for 37, and then they played last week Tennessee State. Not much to look at in that game. I actually think that game was probably more of a part of a 2-week preparation for Georgia than it was preparation for Tennessee State. I totally ignored the 31-27 win. Georgia does everything so well on the offensive side, whether it be run or pass, that it's going to be difficult for Vandy here. They're going to have to throw the football. In my estimation, Kyle Shermer is going to have to make some plays. You're not going to make a living running against Georgia. You're going to have to make some plays downfield through the air and maybe force a couple of turnovers. For the Vandy side, they haven't been that bad at forcing turnovers, 9 so far this year, but they've had 9 themselves. So, again, it's a game where Georgia's going to win going in. Question being, can they win by 28? Eastern Division game, maybe they show a little more interest, but I'm not positive that Georgia has a huge interest in annihilating Vanderbilt when LSU on the road is on deck. So, situationally, maybe a little lean towards Vandy. I think 26 might be a shade too much.
All right, Robbie, moving down the card here, we got 387, 388 Iowa at Minnesota. Looks like the Hawkeyes laying 7 on the highway, 43 the total.
Yeah, things are coming back against Minnesota now. I mean, the beginning of the year was nice. P.J. Fleck, walk-on quarterback. Things are going great, but there's been some injuries to Minnesota, especially at the tailback, and with Winfield, their top corner, gone for the last couple of weeks. And I know he's one of those extreme positive next man up type of coaches, which is a good thing, but Iowa's a different animal here for Minnesota. I just don't know that the Minnesota offense is good enough at this point in time to crack that Iowa defense, which has been stellar all season long. I mean, we have to hand it to Kirk Ferentz one more time for the defensive unit that he's put out on the field. It seems like year in and year out, it really doesn't matter. Iowa's going to be good. This year they seem to be exceptional. And offensively, they have a few more ways to make plays than does Minnesota. This line has moved to a point now, Drew, at -7. Iowa on the road -7, where it gets real dicey for me. I would have been much happier with the opener at -5 than I am with -7, because even though they have a couple more ways to make plays now downfield, Iowa, they're still not anywhere near a prolific offense, and 1 or 2 turnovers could crush them in this game. So I think the line's in a spot now where there's zero value to playing Iowa. I just don't want Minnesota unless I see that, P.J. Fleck can continue with Annexstad, the walk-on quarterback, and his defense at the pace that they started at the beginning of the year. I don't think it's happening for him. Leave this game alone. Total here, 43. Not much there either, but I'll say it again. In modern-day college football, 43 you can make by mistake. 24-20 cashes a ticket there, and certainly in any college football game played, 24-20 is not out of the question.
Robbie, in the MAC, Bowling Green, Toledo. Interesting matchup here. Two offenses that can move the ball. I don't see Bowling Green being able to stop Toledo very often, but never know. It's reflected in the price here with Toledo laying 21.5 at home, 71.5 the total.
Yeah, impossible for me to play, Drew, until we know for sure about Toledo's starting quarterback, Mitchell Guadagni. Suffered a head injury against Fresno State last week, been in the concussion protocol. We don't know if he's going to go or not. To lay 21.5. They might be able to do it simply based on handing off the football. And I'm sure that they can still throw the football even if Guadagni doesn't play. But when you lay 21.5, you'd like to know that you have your starting quarterback and the ability to get to what I would say maybe 49 here would be enough against Bowling Green. Seth Dagey and company on the other side, always capable. He threw for over 300 again last week, so they're not going to stop anybody, but they are going to move the football. I just won't play it either way, side or total, until I see a real report on Guadagni, which may take till Saturday morning before we know if he's going to start or not.
Robbie, we got Auburn at Mississippi State here. And Auburn's laying 3.5 on the road in Starkville, 41.5 the total. And I don't know if you remember, Robbie, but about maybe 6-7 years ago, something like that, these two teams played and the final score was 3-2. I mean, I'm not saying it's going to be that low, but at 41.5, I don't see him getting to 40. What do you think?
Well, neither do a lot of people, Drew, because that number's tumbled down. 45.5 now down to 41.5, like you just said. I kind of like the home underdog here. I think Joe Moorhead's team has to come up with a big game here, and they're built. Both of these teams are mirror images, to tell you the truth. Maybe Auburn's got the slight edge because Stidham is a much better passer than what we see out of Nick Fitzgerald. Nick Fitzgerald, inconsistent at best. Stidham, when they cut him loose, can make bigger plays. So there's your advantage. Your disadvantage is going on the road into Starkville against an angry team, an angry head coach. They've disappointed the last couple of weeks, and to stay afloat in the SEC, they need a victory here. Auburn's offense, to me, has been, and you alluded to it when you said you like under here, but their offense has just been so stagnant. They cannot run the football. They're going to have to lean on Stidham's right arm, and in order to do that, the offensive line is going to have to block this MSU defensive front, which is scary to me. Anything over a field goal, which we're getting here, we're getting 3.5 with the home team, I think is worth taking on the Mississippi State side, because even if Auburn wins, I think they escape with a field goal victory. So for me, it's the home dog plus the points, leaning on that defensive front, and in both aspects, really, Drew. The fact that Auburn's shown a lousy running game, so I think the defensive front can control Auburn's ground attack, and then letting them loose pressure-wise against the Auburn offensive line to get to Stidham. That, for me, is a good matchup for Mississippi State. The same things exist on the other side. I'm not trying to be one-sided about this because, anybody arguing the other side could come right back at me and say Auburn's defensive line should have a good day against this Mississippi State offense, and I wouldn't disagree. It really comes full circle back to what you said at the start of this, under 41.5. How are they going to get to 42 points? Not so sure, but I do think the home underdog is worth a look here.
Yeah, also, I mean, you could count on like special teams or defensive scores. That's a hard thing to handicap. But do you try to handicap that at all, Robbie?
No, you just can't. Unless you know a team's got superior special teams. I think that, we talked yesterday about South Florida, Georgia Tech, when they ran 2 kickoffs back. When you have a kick returner of that nature, you can kind of factor that in a little bit, but I think it's somewhat easier. And it's still kind of an impossible task, but it is somewhat easier to just guesstimate that there might be a turnover or two created by a certain defense than it is to figure for special teams points. So those things always come in strange ways, and they come at weird times of games. If you're playing under or over, they're always unexpected. Some of them make guys happy, some make them mad, but it's too difficult. I really don't factor any of that into a handicap.
All right, Robbie, moving down the card, we got Navy, Air Force. Looks like Navy laying 3 on the road, 48.5 the total.
Well, two teams that defensively aren't good, but they'll certainly know how to defend the other side. Anytime the service academy plays another service academy, you get option offense, and therefore the defenses are well prepped. The good news here, Drew, to me, is that both of these starting quarterbacks are going to play. For Air Force, they're a more efficient offense behind Isaiah Sanders just because he can throw the football better than Arian Wortham can. And on the other side, for Navy to have Malcolm Perry is really important here. I know Zach Gaby comes in on the goal line. He's been the quarterback there for 3 years now, but on the goal line, he's a good short yardage quarterback run type guy. But they need Perry all over the field to make plays for them. So it's good to have both of these guys involved in the game. I tend to disagree with the fact that this total has come down to 48. And I know the reasoning behind it is that neither team has shown consistent offense yet. But they have shown it in spurts, and I do believe they can show it in this particular game. 48 to me is a real low number for these two teams that are both capable of big plays on the offensive side of the football, and both defenses are vulnerable to giving them up. There's no question about it. So I think that I may look toward over 48 in that game. Like I said, I disagree with the line move there. The side in this game has stayed real flat. Open 3, remains 3, shaded a little bit vig-wise towards Navy. But for me, I'm going to take a real hard look at that over, Drew. I think 48, just a little bit too low in my estimation.
All right, Robbie, we got 395 here in the Sun Belt. UL Monroe, Mississippi. So Sun Belt SEC West matchup with 75.5 the total. Yeah, I don't see a lot of stops in this one. Over 3 touchdowns, though. The Rebels land it in Oxford, 22.5.
I wonder a little bit, Drew, about Matt Luke's team. They've had 2 step-up games so far this season, Alabama and LSU, and not that the outcomes, during the week as we handicap them, not that we thought that the outcomes would be any different. I think most figured, and just judged by what the point spreads were on the games, right? But most figured Alabama would handle Mississippi no problem. Most figured LSU would handle Mississippi no problem. I think the big question is the offense just doesn't show up against the top-level teams. It does show up against the lower-level teams. However, the concern I get here is just with the body language of Ole Miss in that LSU game. I happen to have a play on the over last week in that contest, so I was focused on the majority of those 60 minutes. And when Mississippi got behind and when Mississippi got frustrated offensively, you saw it on the faces of A.J. Brown, of DK Metcalf, who came off with cramps quite a few times. You don't see it so much in Jordan Ta'amu, the quarterback, but Mississippi sidelines just look deflated. And under normal circumstances, I would say they're going to go out and ring up 52, 56 against UL Monroe. But I just don't know where their heads are at right now. I think it's a real tough job for Matt Luke at this point in time to go into the locker room and tell his team that's loaded with first-round draft picks. Greg Little at tackle, A.J. Brown, Metcalf. Metcalf probably not this year, but Brown certainly. These first-round picks that maybe want to start preserving themselves, I'm not so sure that Ole Miss is of the right mindset to come out and just light it up the way they should against UL Monroe. All that being said, Caleb Evans and UL Monroe surprised me last week not being able to score whatsoever, lose 46-14 against Georgia State. We went into that a little bit yesterday. They should bounce back a little bit here against the Mississippi defense. You would think, Drew, logical handicapping thinking is when you have a step down in class like this and as drastic as this is for Ole Miss as far as defenses are concerned, that this would automatically get over the total. I'm not sure. Ole Miss held Kent State down a couple of weeks ago. That game was played with some lightning delays, though, so it's hard to gauge. There was no free flow to that contest, Ole Miss and Kent State. Maybe you see a game in that total area again. 75.5, just a little too rich for me at this point in time.
Robbie, a big one here, arguably the biggest game of the weekend with 397 Oklahoma at 398 Texas, or not at, the Red River rivalry, Red River shootout. Actually, I'm not sure what it's supposed to be referred to. If you're in Oklahoma or Texas or know what, hit Rob or I up on Twitter. That's kind of an interesting fact there. You can follow Robbie at Rob Veno Sports, or myself at Drew Martin Bets. But Robbie, do you know which one it is referred to as?
As somebody who's watched it for a number of years, Drew, I believe it's the Red River rivalry. I mean, since the 70s, I think it's been that. But I'm probably dating myself with that. So I don't know. Maybe it's changed over the years. Everything else does. But Red River rivalry, to the best of my knowledge.
All right, good stuff. We got I see this one as having a lot of volatility, Robbie. I mean, outside of the Texas win over TCU, neither team has really a good win on their resume. I mean, with Oklahoma laying 7, 61.5 the total. How do you view this one?
Yeah, my first inclination was to look to the underdog here, simply based on defense. You watch enough Oklahoma football, and you still don't come away impressed with them defensively. As many athletes and 5-star athletes as they get there, they can't seem to get it right, especially on the back end when it comes to throwing teams. Baylor threw for 416 last week against Oklahoma. Now, Tech's a better team than Baylor, but Texas in no way, shape, or form is a better throwing team than Baylor. I mean, Baylor has legitimate receivers, a legitimate throwing quarterback. Texas has none of that. So can Texas take advantage of the back end here would be my major question. But other than that, 7.5 looks kind of big to me. I think that UT defensively can do some things to Oklahoma here. I think they've got enough speed to potentially slow Kyler Murray down a hair. That kid is so fast, Drew, and so quick to make decisions when it comes to running the football that it's hard to contain him totally, because you have to respect his throwing arm. He passes the ball very well. 73% completions last week again. So there's a lot to worry about if you're Texas, but when you look up and down the Oklahoma schedule, I'll get back to what you were talking about in the beginning, they haven't seen a defense really like this one, with the exception of the Iowa State defense. I think Iowa State's defense comes close to Texas. Texas is better. But Iowa State didn't have a bad day against Oklahoma. And then Army came in and totally kept Oklahoma quiet, basically playing possession football. 7.5, a defense like Texas is, it's far more important, in my mind, it's far more important to Tom Herman and Texas to get this game right than it is to Oklahoma. Not to say Oklahoma won't be 100% focused, but I just think there's a little something extra there for the Texas side. If I was going to play it side-wise, I'd probably look to Texas. As far as total is concerned, you're looking at 61.5. I just don't know that Texas has enough passing weaponry to exploit Oklahoma's main weakness. We'll see. Sam Ehlinger's been very protective of the football recently. I think 9 touchdowns and no interceptions in his last 3 games or something like that. So he's been a lot better where that's concerned. Can they make deep plays the way Baylor made them? If they can, they got a good chance of pulling the outright upset here. So we'll see how it goes. Slight lean for me towards Texas.
399-400 here. UConn at Memphis. Looks like 78.5 the total at Chris right now, with Memphis laying 35 at home, Robbie. And it looks like good weather in Memphis on Saturday, so it's going to be interesting to see how many points Memphis scores. How do you view it?
Yeah, we don't have to spend a lot of time dissecting this one, Drew, because the teams are what they are. Although I will say this, the 24 points and the 16-point loss out of Memphis last Friday night to Tulane was quite a surprise to many who played Memphis and over in that contest. It didn't work out either way. It became Tulane and under, and it was pretty evident from the get-go. It got close late, but it did not get over the total. They only reached 64 points. Bounce back effort against a Connecticut team that is just brutal. I mean, we could go through a series of numbers defensively. We don't have to, though, because I think everybody knows by now UConn can't play a lick of defense. Depends how much defense Memphis brings to the table here, Drew, because the one thing to Connecticut's credit and the one thing to Randy Edsel's credit is when you watch UConn, as bad as they get mauled defensively, the team always seems to be optimistic on the sidelines. I mean, he's got everybody's heads up. Everybody plays hard. The offense continues to play. We've talked about David Pindell before, outstanding dual threat quarterback who does a lot of UConn's work for them. 78.5. Wow, that's a lot of points here for me, and I just don't know that I could play, and I don't know that I could lay 35 either. As the season goes on, Connecticut's going to get progressively, or incrementally is even a better word, because it's going to come in small pieces, better, and slide under numbers. But, boy, I don't know. I don't want them here. I don't want Memphis here. We know Memphis is going to light up the board. If they make it over 60, this game gets over the total. But if they don't make it over 60, maybe it's maybe 78.5 is a little too much.
401-402, Robbie. We got UL Lafayette at Texas State. It looks like Lafayette laying 4 on the road, 59.5 the total.
Yeah, I'm a bit interested in this, Drew. I think that UL Lafayette right now hasn't had much of an opportunity to play a team, let's say, at their level recently. You know, they've had to play Mississippi State and Alabama 2 of the last 3 weeks, which were extreme blowouts. They lose 56-10, 56-14, almost identical scores. In between, they lose by 2 to Kilton Anderson and Coastal Carolina 30-28. But they're going to welcome the sight of Texas State here. After you play Mississippi State's defense and Alabama's defense 2 of the last 3 weeks, you want to see something like Texas State's defense march in, or you go to their place to play them, which is the case this week. Plenty of offensive weaponry here with Regis at running back, with Nunez at quarterback. I just think UL Lafayette, in my mind, Drew, hasn't been able the last 3 weeks to really cut loose offensively, and they're going to get a chance because Everett Withers' team, Texas State, plays at extreme pace, and they found a quarterback that they trust now, so they like going at that pace, and I think you get extra possessions here. I think you get a lot of points. The initial movement has been towards under, and not sure I agree with that. I'm going to be looking over here. I think that both of these teams on the defensive side can be exploited. And I just think UL Lafayette is going to have a real good time against the Texas State defense after seeing Mississippi State and Alabama in 2 of the last 3 weeks.
Yeah, good breakdown. That makes sense. We got Texas San Antonio at Rice next up, and it looks like UTSA laying 1 on the road, 50 the total, Robbie.
I'm going to trust Mike Bloomgren's team from Houston here, Drew. I think Rice under a field goal has to be the right side. Texas San Antonio has shown nothing to, dissuade me from that opinion. They did have a tough schedule. I have to grant them that. Texas San Antonio started the season with, for them, the level of Conference USA that they're at for them was a difficult non-conference schedule, no doubt about it. But so did Rice. Rice played some teams in there, and they played Houston real good for a half, and they had to take their lumps as well. But what I've seen from them and what he's been able to do with their offense, bringing that Stanford-style offense to Rice, and it hasn't been limited to just let's run the ball up the middle. Rice has been pretty balanced both ways on offense. I like what I've seen out of them for we're talking about 2 sub-500 teams here, so let's not build them up too much. But I think in this particular matchup, Rice has more offense from what we've seen, a lot more offensive firepower in my mind, and Texas San Antonio unable to get to 20 points. Even against the Rice defense, which has been shredded, I don't know that San Antonio is going to be able to get to those 20 points. So I think under a field goal, real good here for Rice.
We got Kansas State at Baylor in the Big 12 here, Robbie. 55 the total, with Baylor laying 3.5 at home.
Yeah, this is, I don't know, Drew. K-State under Bill Snyder returned a team this year that should be a lot better than what they are. And I don't know what that's from. I really don't. I don't know what it's a product of. But I still look at their personnel and the fact that these 2 quarterbacks have played in the system for a couple of years, and you wonder how they cannot move the football. But they are the same, offensive philosophy that they've been for however many years under Bill Snyder. And maybe that's just not translating anymore, because that offense is really what's dragging them down. It's put a lot of pressure on the defense, which can be better than the numbers indicate, Duke Shelley and company, but they just haven't been able to. I mean, I wonder, every time I look at a K-State game each week, I feel like it could be the breakout week offensively, but now there's been so many bad weeks offensively. I don't know. Like I say, maybe they just are what they've shown us on paper, and it's never going to change. If that's the case, you want to get on Baylor, which is a team that's really excited right now. You watch them against Oklahoma, and I know they lost 66-33, but Matt Rule's team has players. They have more speed than K-State. They have more vertical downfield ability than K-State, and it's not even close. Defensively, they're still a little bit shy on quality depth, but they play hard throughout a contest. And Kansas State is not going to tempo them to death the way OU did last week. Everything that we've seen so far, Drew, should make this a real easy look toward the Baylor side, because it's a team that's just starving for wins, and it's like a vulture. They're going to see something in their way here on Saturday in purple and silver uniforms that, as of right now, doesn't look like they'll put up much resistance. I hate to do it because Bill Snyder in underdog roles has been real good over his tenure, and it's a long tenure, but I don't know. Right now I can't play K-State. I would look towards Baylor.
Robbie, big one here in the ACC. We got Florida State at Miami, 48.5 the total, with Miami laying 13.5 at the Rock on Saturday, 3:30.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing fundamentally, Drew, if you just look at fundamentals in this game, the biggest question will be, can Florida State handle the Miami defensive front seven, which has been real good all season long, and they probably overwhelmed the Florida State offensive line here. That switch to Willie Taggart's Gulf Coast offense just hasn't gone well. They came from behind last week, got a 28-21 victory, and Francois has been fairly good throwing the football, but I just anticipate him being under immense pressure from that Miami front. They left a bad taste in a lot of bettors' mouths after they lost to LSU opening day. Since then, they've been nothing but dominant. The competition level has been subpar by all means. Savannah State and Toledo, defensively at least. Toledo's good offensively, but defensively no good. Florida International and UNC. It's not a great list of teams, but still, they've been dominant. And I wonder about Florida State here being able to protect their quarterback, being able to hand off the ball and make any yardage whatsoever. The last time FSU faced a pretty good defense was that game against Virginia Tech, and they got absolutely stonewalled. So I know Willie Taggart says his team made progress last week. I have no idea what he considers progress, but having to come up with 2 touchdowns late to beat Louisville to me isn't progress. So it's a big number to lay with Miami here, and it's a rivalry game, so you're going to get a huge effort out of Florida State. Just don't know if that huge effort's going to be good enough, Drew. After, emotion wears off after about a quarter or so and talent takes over. And not that FSU's void of talent, but they just haven't fit into the systems and schemes that are presented to them now. Jawan Pass had his best throwing day of the year last week for Louisville against this Florida State defense. So certainly with Perry, and you know what? Maybe I should defer to you because you got to see N'Kosi Perry up close last week. You went to that UNC game. To me, they're going to make some yardage in that passing game against the Florida State defense, which couldn't stop Bobby Petrino's really pedestrian pass offense for most of this year. Last week, like I say, Pass had a big day. Doesn't bode well for Florida State here.
Yeah, I mean, N'Kosi Perry, he can really move. That's one thing I noticed as far as his running ability was very impressive. I mean, he could throw the ball always, but I mean, what would you compare him to as far as a running threat, Robbie? I mean,
well, I think if you're a defensive coordinator, just if I was on the other sideline and I had to defend him, he's a threat. So you have to make concessions to that end of the game, which takes away from your pass defense in a lot of instances, Drew. So I would say he's just evaluating him. He's good enough for a defensive coordinator to worry about and have to adjust his defense, or during this prep week have to prep his defense for being able to contain him and his ability to get out of the pocket. So it's a major advantage for Miami, no doubt about it. When you have a quarterback that can throw as well as he can, and a quarterback that defensive coordinators have to fear running the football in broken play situations, it makes a huge difference.
Yeah, it's going to be an exciting game there in Miami Gardens, but we'll move down the card here. 409-410 Nebraska at Wisconsin. Looks like 57.5 the total, with Whiskey laying 17 in Camp Randall.
Had the total last week over with Purdue and Nebraska, as a lot of steam did late in the week in that game. I think it got its way up to 58.5 by week's end. I think I got in at 56 a couple days sooner, but just playing Nebraska over the total seems to be a way to go here, Drew. Just knee-jerk, mechanical, blindly, whatever phrase you use to describe just running to the window and playing something without knowing anything about the game. I think that's the way I'm approaching Nebraska at this point in time. That defense, Scott Frost's press conference should have been embarrassing to the guys who wear the jerseys for Nebraska after last week. He's embarrassed. He thinks that they don't play with, I'll paraphrase here, with any heart on the defensive side of the football. They've got offensive weaponry. I know they can score some points, even though Wisconsin's an outstanding defense. I think that the reason why you play Nebraska over, or the reason why I play Nebraska over at this point in time, is because the numbers are manageable and they don't play any defense, and they can score they can score enough to get you over the total. So Alex Hornibrook and company figure, in my mind, to have a big day here against the Nebraska D. Scott Frost can moan and groan and try to psychologically get through to his defense all he wants, but that defense has been lousy for the last 2 years. They're in a new system this year, and from the get-go, they knew that they weren't going to be any better. I think they hoped that they were going to be better, but I think if push comes to shove and you look deep down into that defensive staff, they knew this defense wasn't going to be any better. They're not. Wisconsin should run it. Hornibrook can throw it. He's got his, a good portion of his receiving core back from the beginning of the year, so that makes a difference for Wisconsin. Like I say, Nebraska games become simple handicaps for me now. If I see a total that's reasonable, just play it over.
Robbie, 411, 412, a little bit of a degenerate special, 10:30 p.m. Eastern time slot here. Colorado State at San Jose State. Looks like CSU laying 2.5 on the road, 61.5 the total.
Yeah, there could be money to be made here too, Drew, in this degenerate special. I mean, just from a handicapping standpoint, CSU comes off a bye, and that bye came at a pretty good time for their offense. The defense is what it is. They're not going to be able to change that defense to something great overnight. They've given up 40 points per game so far this season. Two of their opponents were Illinois State and Arkansas. Arkansas hasn't played much offense all season long. Illinois State's an FCS team, a decent one, but still 35-19 loss in that game. And then the other three games, they give up 48 to Florida, 45 and 43 to Colorado and Hawaii. They're what they are defensively. But offensively, it had gone a little bit south here with Carter Samuels at quarterback, and it shouldn't. They should be able to move the football, especially against this San Jose State team, which gives up yardage in bunches. I think the bye week for head coach Mike Bobo really helped or should help them from an offensive standpoint here. All that being said, you have to be a little bit or have your eyes opened a little bit to the San Jose State passing game. They can't run the ball a lick, and they don't pretend to be able to run the ball a lick, but they throw for almost 300 a game against a defense that's given up 257 a game. That's a pretty good matchup for San Jose State here. You're in the altitude. Maybe their defense gets fatigued a little bit in the end, but I'm looking at that number in the very low 60s in a Colorado State game, and I think both teams have huge offensive advantages. I probably look to play it over, and aside from it being a get your money back game if you've had a bad Saturday afternoon, I think just overall before the day starts, when you walk up to the window for the first time, this probably should be part of your card. Colorado State, San Jose State over.
Robbie, and I got to clarify, when I say degenerate special, I'm saying it tongue-in-cheek. I absolutely agree with you. These can be beatable. So I don't know. Did you take it that way?
No, because it's been referred. The late game out on the West Coast has been referred to that forever, Drew, in betting terms. So it's certainly no slight to the game itself. It's a bailout game for people that have had bad Saturdays. It's a game that I think when we refer to degenerate special, if you were going to define it, it's a game that probably wouldn't take a lot of money normally, but takes a ton of money because it's in the time slot that it's in. In my case, this particular matchup, I think should take money right off the bat.
Yeah, and talking about taking money, I mean, this one will have a lot of tickets written as well. We got the 12 Eastern midnight the game here with Hawaii having a home game. Wyoming making the trip out to the islands. 57 the total. Looks like Hawaii laying 3 at home, Robbie.
Yeah, Wyoming's a team anchored in defense. No question about it. I think this is a simple fundamental breakdown in this game. They're anchored in defense, and they're especially anchored in being able to rush the passer. But Cole McDonald and company, the ball comes out so quick in this run-and-shoot offense, and the pace, the tempo has become so extreme for Hawaii now that Nick Rolovich brought this offense back, that I don't know if that pass rush is going to make it through 4 quarters here, Drew. First of all, I don't think they'll approach Cole McDonald. Maybe they do early, but if they don't get there early, they're certainly not going to get there late because they don't have enough depth across that defensive line to be able to chase these guys around all day long. And then I don't think they have the speed in the secondary to run with these Hawaii routes that they run in this run and shoot. They've got multiple receivers. I mean, Hawaii's got 4 guys that on any given play at the receiver position can burn you for 6 points. So it's a real challenge for Wyoming, who, as I looked down their schedule earlier this week, really don't have anybody thus far on the schedule that they could use as a gauge. They certainly can't simulate this in practice. How are they going to simulate what Hawaii does in practice? No how, no way. Other side of the coin, though, has been the Hawaii defense, and the potential does exist for Wyoming with freshman quarterback Vanderbilt, who hasn't been great so far this season. A lot of accolades coming in, not great overall so far, but they may be able to run the football a little bit, although I'll say this. In Hawaii games that I've seen, which is everyone except for the most recent 4 overtime against San Jose, I had to listen to that one on radio, but they've been able at the outset to stop an opposing running game and get off to a lead. It didn't happen in the Army game, the getting off to a lead part or a big enough lead. But here, if they shut Wyoming down early and get up 21-0, so let's say somewhat to the way they did against Navy, this game's over. Cut and dry. So I think Hawaii might be a good way to look. I also think total getting up and over is a good way to look.
Yeah, that was a good breakdown to end it here, Robbie. And what do you got on tap for this weekend?
Well, the college card will be strong as it's been throughout the first 5 weeks here, Drew. I'm anticipating to have a full card of 8 plays, 20-star, 15 stars, but probably 3 like we've been going the last 3 weeks. I think the cards have been very similar, a 20-star, 3 15s, and then 4 10s to back it up. Like a lot of stuff out there, still we haven't reached the point yet, I don't think, where numbers are too tight for us to go ahead and beat. So that'll be the college card. It'll be up later today, this evening at the latest, and then of course the NFL card will go up tomorrow morning. But don't forget about baseball. Playoff baseball will be up. I see a couple of things tomorrow that we're going to play. So it's going to be an active weekend, Drew. I mean, anybody that subscribes or signs up and follows me, they're going to get some plays. So we're going to fire, and we'll see how it goes. It's gone good so far. We'll look to continue that trend.
Yeah, Robbie, a great choice on sportsmemo.com. Guys, we'll be back tomorrow with NFL Every Game on the Board podcast.